Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 488 for the 25th of February, 2018. Richard Saunders here with you from let's have a look. Raining. Yes, it's raining, still humid, Sydney, Australia. Before we start, thank you to those people who wrote to me and left comments expressing their sympathy. As you may recall, last week I said I fell on my back and hurt it. Luckily, nothing was broken. Thank you. I appreciate your kind thoughts. It's the back is getting much better. It's the tooth that. Oh dear! It's one of the back bicuspids, something or other, up at the top left, and it looks like it's going to need a crown. But at the moment, the nerve is acting up, so the painkillers have kicked in. So I think I should be able to do a Skeptic Zone podcast. Coming up on this week's show, we're going to chat to Susan Gerbic from Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia, which we do from time to time. And I thought it would be interesting, because we're always talking about it and advertising it, saying, why don't you become an editor for Guerrilla Skepticism and edit Wikipedia pages? I thought it would be interesting to talk to an actual editor, one here in Australia, Stuart Jones in Victoria, who took up the call, contacted Susan Gerbic, and is now an editor. So I have a chat with Stuart in Victoria and Susan Gerbic all the way over there in the United States, and we find out what the process is it enjoyable, what can you learn, and I think you'll find it very interesting. And if you're considering being an editor for Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia, this is the interview for you. Following that, it's our new reporter, Dr Paulie, and let me read you her bio, which is at skepticzone.tv. Dr Paulie, reporter, and her segment is called Let's Have a Random Rant. A Random Rant. Dr. Paulie is a Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Research in Evidence-Based Practice, Bond University. She is also a practicing community pharmacist and long-time skeptic. Originally from Melbourne, in 2012 she helped organise the annual Australian Skepticon meeting. That's the Australian Skeptics Convention. Now she's in sunny Queensland. She is the Gold Coast Skeptics' current president and secretary. And you can click the link to the Gold Coast Skeptics at skepticzone.tv. I'll add a link in Dr. Paulie's segment there on this week's show notes. Now, it's wonderful to have Dr. Paulie on board, a new reporter, very exciting. I wrote a little theme for her, which is, you'll hear it later. She said she liked head-banging music. Okay. She's going to be talking to Associate Professor Ken Harvey. Now, again, you would have heard over the years on the Skeptic Zone interviews and reports about the TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, the overseeing body, the people that put OST-R for registered or OST-L for listed on medication in Australia. They oversee devices, medicines, that sort of thing. And they've been coming under a lot of criticism lately because of the watering down of their, their authority. I'm not sure if that's quite the right word. A lot of people are very concerned that things like pre-approval for assessment of therapeutic goods is being watered down. There seems to be, as reported last week, a bizarre list of new indications like yin and yang and qi and these sort of words coming in, which is incredible. And the complaints, if people have complaints about medicine, that they're the overseeing body. Well, Dr. Harvey is a long-time friend and critic of the TGA, and he's going to be talking to Dr. Paulie about the latest amendments to the TGA, the laws that govern it, and some of the real concerns he and many others have. Now, bear in mind that this interview was conducted in less than ideal circumstances, so there's a bit of background noise. The connection wasn't all that clear, but you can certainly hear everything. And I think anybody who's interested in regulation concerning medications anywhere will get a lot out of this interview. Let's have a random rant with Dr. Paulie. But before we start, here's a little story that was just brought to my attention by our former reporter and Vice President of the Australian Skeptics, Joanne Benamou. And it's all about scientific journals and their accountability when it comes to letters and papers published and retractions. And we look to Retraction Watch, tracking retractions as a window into the scientific process. What an important website this is, and I'll link in the show notes, and I think you might find it very interesting, especially the scientific academics out there. Published in February at Retraction Watch, retractionwatch.com. Retracted letter about vaccine safety made potentially slanderous claims. Last October, David Hawkes read a letter to the editor that shocked him. It alleged Hawkes and a colleague had lied about their professional affiliations. Hawkes told Retraction Watch that he had contacted the journal Toxicology on October 19 to complain that the letter contained, quote, numerous factual errors and could adversely affect our professional standing, end quote, and requested the journal retract it as soon as possible. Hawkes told the editors of Toxicology, quote, the claims about myself and Joanne Benamou are factually incorrect, and we have received professional advice that they also could be considered slanderous, end quote. The journal retracted the letter yesterday, 4 months after Hawkes' request. The letter was co-authored by Christopher Shaw, who has withdrawn 3 papers about vaccine safety in the past 2 years. It was written in response to a letter by Hawkes and Benamou that critiqued a 2016 paper by Shaw and his colleagues, which had suggested a vaccine adjuvant might have negative effects. The 2016 paper has been cited 7 times, according to Clarivate's Analytics Web of Science. According to the notice, quote, this letter to the editor has been retracted at the request of the managing editor as it contained inappropriate statements about the affiliation of the authors of the earlier letter to the editor, published by Toxicology 389, 2017-53. However, evidence has been provided to the editor to support the affiliation of these authors. Apologies are offered to the readers for any inconvenience that this may cause. End quote. In September, Shaw, Christopher Exley of Keele University in the UK, and others fired back with a letter of their own, in which they accused Hawkes and Benamou of fabricating their affiliations. Quote, Hawkes suggests incorrectly that he is currently a staff member at the University of Melbourne, and neither of the affiliations given by Benamou have ever heard of her. End quote. After reading the letter, Hawkes provided the journal with proof that he works at the University of Melbourne in Victoria, Australia, and that Benamou, quote, has written permission from Monash Bioethics Centre, as a postgraduate student and teaching associate, to list them as affiliations, end quote, and is a full-time employee of Austin Health, both in Victoria. A commentator on PubPeer, who Hawkes said was not him or Benamou, also pointed out potential issues with the author's 2016 paper and letter, noting, quote, I have never seen a letter to the editor as unprofessional as this, end quote. Hawkes said he was not really satisfied with the retraction notice. Quote, the editors apologised to the readers but not to the authors, Benamou and myself, and who had to fight for over 4 months to have unfounded claims about us removed from a professional scientific journal. And you can read the full statement at Retraction Watch. That was just the edited highlights at retractionwatch.com with a link in this week's show notes. And I'm pleased for Joanne Benamou and David Hawkes that this retraction at last was forthcoming, although, as David Hawkes points out, the apology was not to them, but to the readers. And a big shout out to Joanne Benamou and David Hawkes. But that's enough for me right now. I'm going to run downstairs and have something soft because of my tooth. Maybe some ice cream. No. Oh, no. Anything even slightly cold is really not very good for my tooth at the moment. Some warm ice cream? Some jelly? Well, I run downstairs and decide about all that. I hope you enjoy The Skeptic Zone. And joining me now all the way from Salinas, California and Sale, Victoria, Australia, we have Susan Gerbic from Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia. And we also have one of the Australian editors of Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia, Stuart Jones. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Richard.
Hi.
Hi, Susan.
And it's quite fun because thanks to modern technology, we're all doing a three-way conversation interview, but I can see everybody and everybody can see me. Nothing's a secret anymore, Susan.
Oh, well. I'm really interested in what Stuart's going to tell you today.
All right. So I thought I'd give you both a call because, Susan, we interview you from time to time on the Skeptic Zone, and we run the promotions for Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia. And it occurred to me a lot of listeners might be interested to know what happens once they've contacted you, what the process is, and what the discovery process is. Stuart, you're a great case in point. Now, you, out of the blue, one day you were inspired to contact Susan, and maybe you can pick up the story, what happened to you.
Well, Susan added me to the Facebook group, which is a lot of fun. Secret Facebook group, or not so secret, as we like to say. And gave me a link to a Google Drive with all the training material on it, and away I went.
And you found all the materials you needed right on the Google Drive, huh?
Yep, they're all there, every one of them.
So it wasn't a difficult process for you to learn the ropes, as it were. The training was fairly straightforward. And I think you now are responsible for doing quite a bit of editing on Wikipedia.
Oh, a little bit. Not as much GSoW stuff as I'd like, but Susan's allowed me to run off and do some other things as well. But I think that having that freedom is very good as well. Very good part of it. But I've rewritten 3 pages, I think, for GSoW, and written about 4 or 5 of my own.
And what were some of the topics or the pages from a skeptical point of view that you've been working on?
I've been working on Blue Whale. I can't claim much credit for that because our editor in London has done a lot of work there. Tracy Spicer, who everyone in Australia knows, she's a journalist who's running with the Me Too campaign. And I wrote the entire page for voluntary assisted dying in Victoria, which has just become law late last year. So I wrote Anthony Pratkanis, which was my first one that a lot of people would know about Anthony, but he's called on by the media in times of conflict in places, and he's a social psychologist who looks at scams as well.
And you can't help, I suppose, when you do this sort of thing, you would be learning a lot personally yourself about these topics.
Plenty. I certainly learned a lot about urban myths and how they work from working on the Blue Whale game, and sort of learned a lot about people and how they behave too. A bit of creepypasta, if you want to know what that is, you can look it up on Wikipedia, but mass hysteria, that's on there as well. It's certainly very interesting.
All right, now I'm going to ask you about the recent Skeptic Camp, and I know you gave a talk there about editing Wikipedia. But before we do that, Susan, is this sort of typical of the editors you have around the world picking it up relatively easily and then running with it?
Well, it's a lot of fun. People are always surprised whenever they write to me, and I almost immediately put them in the group. They think there's some sort of test I'm supposed to be giving them. Some of the emails I receive from them are quite interesting, where they'll give me this in-depth look of why they should be joining GSoW. I accept pretty much anybody who wants to join. If you're willing to try, I will take you on. And when Stuart joined the group, I looked at his email recently. He said he could give me 4 or 5 hours a week. He gives us a lot more than 4 or 5 hours a week. Sometimes it feels like 4 or 5 hours a day. And that's by choice, right, Stuart?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
He was apprehensive, I think, at first. And, it takes a lot of time to train. And Stuart makes it sound like it was just like really simple. It's not that it's difficult. It's kind of like taking an undergraduate college class with assignments. But being on your own a lot, where you're having to do the projects yourself and be motivated yourself. And then you have this annoying professor that lives in California that uses Facebook to talk to you all the time and say, hey, how you doing? How you doing? How you coming along with that? It's an unusual, I think it's an unusual thing for people to sign on to do. It does take months to train. Stuart's typical, I guess. He's not a computer programmer, and half of the group probably are involved in the computer industry in some way. And Stuart tended to be a bit shy at first, and now he's one of the troublemakers of our secret cabal.
That's a nice way to put it.
They formed their own little friendships and their own little world, and there's a lot of fun things that are going on in the cabal. I think you should mention what the blue whale is, Stuart.
Oh, the blue whale is it's an urban myth started out of Russia in relation to a guy getting locked up for curating death groups on the internet, and somehow it grew through the media to turn into a big suicide game, and the idea was the curator, or loosely a mentor, would find somebody, give them 50 tasks to do, and the final task being to commit suicide. So it was a fairly sort of creepy game. Some of the tasks included self-harm and watching scary movies, and it worked there all the way up to that task, and that was the myth. And it is a myth, but a lot of people were jumping on board. It was causing a bit of mass hysteria, particularly in India. I think we must have been getting 200,000 page views a day just from India, and there were students getting on the talk page and saying how terrible it was, and how we need to get rid of this game, when in fact it wasn't a game at all, and it was all like I keep saying, it's an urban myth. So that's what that was about. We had to remove a lot of things from the page at one stage. The 50 tasks were listed. We removed that, and we removed a lot of the misinformation from the page, I guess, as well. So I think we called it the worst case of ref bombing we'd ever seen, and a reference is something to cite, or a citation that you see down the bottom of a page. There was well over 300, I think, on the page at one stage, and we've got it down to below 200 now, and quite a few sceptical viewpoints have come onto it from psychologists rather than just journalists trying to beat it up and create clickbait, I guess.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know. I mean, I had heard about that. But again, it's just typical of the sort of things you will learn if you decide to become an editor for Guerrilla Skepticism. Susan, what sort of statistics now are we looking at? And I know, Stuart, you gave a talk at Skeptic Camp where you did mention some of the stats, but we might get them from Susan. Of course, surely, Susan, you have your finger on the pulse of this sort of thing.
Right. So we are tracking about 525 pages that we have written or rewritten in the time that we have existed. And of those 500, I can tell you right now, we're at 545 pages as of right now. And those 545 pages have just given us 23 million page views. So we've just hit, We're getting about 35,000 page views a day. And we're hitting about 900,000 page views a month. So we're almost at 1 million page views a month. So it's really just insane how many page views people are reading our work. And this is in many languages, not just in English. We are writing in Dutch and Italian and German and Portuguese and Spanish. And we just had a new recruit who just finished training, and he lives in Sri Lanka, and he'll be writing in his language that he wants to write in there. He's about started. I think he's starting on homeopathy, and it's some language in Sri Lanka. And don't have it handy right at the moment.
Now, Susan, while I think about it, because I can see you, and Stuart, I don't know if you noticed behind Susan, there's a map of the world with Australia right behind her head. So that's very nice, Susan, that you're thinking of us. But on the other side of you, as I look, I noticed a little plaque there from the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, and big congratulations on becoming a fellow.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I've just become a fellow, and I just got the magazine today, and I can see that they put me in the front cover. I'm right there next to Murray Gilman. Pretty damn good. And then I'm still in the back cover as a scientific and technical consultant, apparently.
Now, Stuart, before we wrap it up, and we alluded to this earlier, you gave a talk about your activities for Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia at the recent Skeptic Camp, and I think that was only in the last week. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'll just sort of gave a bit of a rundown about what drew me to, I guess, becoming skeptically active. Anyway, through my wife being sick and having breast cancer, which she's thankfully over now. And then I just ran into what we did at Guerrilla Skepticism, ran through a few things that I thought were fun, or fun things that we did. And it is a lot of fun, because I wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't. The hook sort of wouldn't be there. And then I sort of finished up with a few statistics about Wikipedia and how we got along with our statistical analysis. So it was good. It was I really enjoyed it. There was about 50 people there. It would have been about the 7th or 8th Skeptic Camp down there on the Surf Coast, which I think makes it the longest running Skeptic Camp in Australia as well, which is just fantastic. Very intimate occasion, and we all went and sampled some great beer at the Aries pub at the end of the day. So.
That's always a good thing. And folks, Stuart gave a talk there, which is on YouTube. As a matter of fact, I viewed the other day and enjoyed that. And I'll certainly add a link to that talk in the show notes.
Oh, I also wanted to mention that Stuart was instrumental in one of our latest psychic stings. We're calling it Operation Peach Pit, and that has yet to be revealed, the results. But that was another one of our stings, and it was run over Facebook, and it was about a month of work. And Stuart stepped up and took on one of the lead roles of the creator of the fake Facebook pages that we were trying to use to catch a psychic that was in Philadelphia, oddly enough, and nowhere near me. So we had a crew go in from Philadelphia that had no idea what was on those Facebook pages, trying to catch a psychic in a hot read. And the story of that and the results of that should be coming out hopefully in late March.
Something to look forward to. I love these names. Peach Pit. You'll have to have an Operation Vegemite or Tim Tam, I think, at some stage.
Got to find me a nice psychic over in Australia that I can use. I'm looking for, they need to be hungry. They need to be, we want to catch hot readers, and they need to use Facebook. So, if you could find me some, I'll be happy to run another sting, Operation Vegemite. That might be interesting.
Because, and I'll have a chat to you offline, Susan, because I certainly know of a few psychics in this country who use hot reading who cheat, to be blunt about it, without mentioning names. So we might have a little chat a bit later on, Susan.
Well, send me some names, because I certainly have a lot on my plate right now, but it's something that we would like to be doing. I can't see any reason why we couldn't do a sting in Australia.
Something to look forward to indeed. Well, look, Stuart, all the way down there in Sale in Victoria, a lovely part of the world, and Susan all the way over there in Salinas, California. Thanks again. And folks, another prompt if you want to join in the worldwide campaign and do something for science and reason. Well, I would suggest you become an editor for Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia. But for now, Susan and Stuart, thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
The Skeptic Magazine, the journal from Australian skeptics. Subscribe online to the world's second oldest skeptical magazine. Visit www.skeptics.com.au and click the publications link. You can also find there over 30 years of back issues free to download. The Skeptic, the magazine from Australian skeptics.
Let's have a random rant with Dr. Paulie.
Hi, this is Dr. Paulie, and welcome to my new segment, Random Rant. I'll be talking about science issues that interest me, with or without some more expert friends. Today, I talk with Associate Professor Ken Harvey about the recently passed amendments to the TGA bill. I'm here today with Dr. Ken Harvey, Associate Professor at the School of Public Health and Preventative Medicine at Monash University, and well-known anti-quackery crusader, and one could say, long-time critic of the TGA. Thank you for joining me, Ken.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Paulie. Let me just rephrase that. I'm a friend of the TGA, but sometimes a critical friend.
Yes, I think that our closest friends and best friends are the ones that are able to criticise us constructively. I'm just wondering if you could, just for our international listeners and for those who are unaware of what the TGA is, to explain the purpose of the TGA, or Therapeutic Goods Administration, and the TGA bill.
Yeah, well, first, the Therapeutic Goods Administration is the regulatory authority in Australia for licensing medicines and medical devices. And it's similar, I suppose, in that sense to the United States Food and Drug Administration. So its purpose is hopefully to ensure that medicines and medical devices that are available to the Australian public are of reasonable quality, safety and efficacy and fit for purpose. So that's its job. And with medicines, it encompasses not just prescription medicines and over-the-counter medicines, but unlike the USA, it encompasses also, it regulates supplements, or what we call complementary and traditional medicines.
And what is the TGA bill, or what was it prior to this new amendment, and its purpose in regulation?
Well, it's got the rather uninteresting title of the Therapeutic Goods Administration 2017 Measures Number 1 Bill, which sounds boring, but in fact it was quite a controversial bill. And some bits of it weren't so controversial. For example, bits of it came up with a provisional approval scheme so patients could have earlier access to promising new medicines, and that's something that most regulatory agencies are grappling with, how to get promising new medicines available. The other non-controversial provisions with medical devices, again, was to allow overseas regulatory departments to have their approvals accepted by Australia, which might again get them to reach for markets sooner. So there was a couple of non-controversial, sensible bits. But boy, there were some controversial areas, particularly regarding complementary medicines or supplements, and also advertising of medicines to the general public.
So I saw you in December at the Victorian Skeptics Cafe meetup, where you had your students present their whack-a-mole project findings, and you brought the TGA Amendment Bill to our attention then. What was initially proposed, and what was the issue here?
Look, there was three issues that concerned us. First, the TGA was proposing to abolish pre-approval of advertisements to the public for therapeutic products. The second one was they were coming up with a list of permitted indications. The concept was good, but the list was crazy. And the third thing, they proposed to take over the entire advertising complaint system and introduce a new code Now, certainly there were problems with the old system, and there's a need for a new code, but we didn't trust the TGA, and we still don't.
So let's start off by discussing first the potential repercussions of getting rid of the pre-approval of advertising.
Yeah, well, at the moment, there is a system for checking advertisements before they go into mainstream media, which is print and television. Now, it's not perfect. It started a number of years ago when we didn't have things like the internet and pay TV. So the pre-approval system doesn't cope with new media. But on the other hand, it does actually pick up an awful lot of bad advertisements that do need to be changed and improved. The actual system is delegated by the TGA to two industry associations, and that's a bit of a problem because sometimes they come to different conclusions on the same advertisement. It's also not perfect, even for the ads they pre-approve. They'll pick up things that are obviously crazy, like someone advertising a new product for cancer, which you're not allowed to do, I might add, to the general public. They'll pick up things like there's no mandatory warnings. You're meant to say, if symptoms persist, see a doctor. So they pick up those sorts of things, but they certainly don't pick up things where there's concern that the evidence supporting a claim may not be appropriate. They haven't got time to look up the internet, to look up references and check those things out. So although it picks up a lot of good things and keeps bad ads out, it's not perfect, and we still find that something like 10% of ads that have been pre-approved nevertheless will be found to breach the code of conduct when they go to the complaint system. Our concern, well, why did the government want to remove it? Well, they're intercutting red tape, making life easier for industry. And so what they proposed was, well, let's get rid of all the pre-approval, and hopefully by having some stronger sanctions and a bit more post-marketing surveillance, that there won't be any more problems. Interestingly, even one of the industry associations, the Australian Self-Medication Industry Association, which conducts pre-approval, thought this was crazy because they pick up so many problems themselves. The system of increased penalties and whatever, again, is going to require the TGA to take companies to court. They've never done that. They haven't got the specialist lawyers to do it. They were talking about the ability to get bad ads out within 10 days. Now, that just seems impossible because you've got to give industry the right of response to a complaint. They certainly, if they're going to be threatened with fines or injunctions, then again, they're going to lawyer up. And we find that for other regulatory agencies like the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, which does have, again, good powers to bring industry under control, it can take 12 months, not 10 days, to bring companies to court and to get a good judgment against them. So again, we felt the TGA really is somewhat innocent about how difficult it's going to be to introduce these new penalties and sanctions.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. And so perhaps we can have a quick discussion about the second concern, and probably one of the more disturbing ones is the indication list, the permissible indications.
Yes, well, again, the idea was quite a good one. At the moment, there is no pre-market evaluation by the TGA. As I say, there's some pre-approval of some advertisements, but there's no pre-market approval of complementary medicines or supplements by the TGA. It's a trust-based system, and as you might imagine, these sponsors can't be trusted. They're meant to hold evidence to support claims they make. When the TGA does get around to some post-marketing surveillance, they find, and for the last few years, they've been finding that regulatory violations run at around 80%, of which most of those are because the companies actually don't have the evidence for their claims when it's looked at. So what the companies do is make up lots of creative claims themselves, which, again, can only be dealt with by complaints or by post-marketing surveillance. So again, The TGA thought, okay, let's get rid of their ability to have creative claims, which is a good idea, and let's restrict them to a limited list of pre-approved indications or claims. So the concept was good, but typically the TGA then asked the industry to come up with a list. And of course the industry came up with a list of over 1,000. 84% of the claims on the list were for what we call traditional indications, indications that don't need a scientific base, indications for traditional Chinese medicine, such as stimulate stagnant qi, subdue yang, disinhibit water. I mean, some fascinating indications for traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, homeopathy, all of which are traditional medicine modalities. And as I say, the TGA, bless them, seem to put traditional indications from alternate medical practices on the same basis as scientific information, in which it's gone through the hierarchy of claims and controlled trials and meta-analyses. So you can imagine that this list of permitted indications with these laughable claims of disinhibiting water was actually caused ridicule for the TGA. There's been some glorious radio and television programs and newspaper articles ridiculing the TGA. Basic concern was it was going to allow a flood of these traditional products, and we're seeing them already. I mean, there's a big Chinese influence in Australia, and our concern was that this is really pushing pseudoscience. It's encouraging the sponsors of supplements to evade the need for scientific proof. I mean, why should they when they can come up with traditional indications? And it's certainly going to confuse the public. And I mean, already we're seeing advertisements for menopause products with menopause in big capital letters, the byline of ancient wisdom, modern medicine, and then balancing your yin and your yang. You know, what consumers will see is the huge label, menopause, and they'll see the slogan that this is ancient wisdom and modern medicine, and they'll have no idea that there is absolutely no scientific evidence whatsoever. This is certainly not going to, hasn't stopped it from being advertised, and it's not going to stop a flood of this craziness on the Australian market. But we will still be trying. There is a new code coming up. We've got the possibility of putting advisory statements and warnings in the new code. Industry is resisting. The media interests are resisting because they can make a lot of money from advertisements. Consumers and health professionals like the College of GPs are all for it, but all for the advisory. But I suspect, given that the TGA is 100% funded by industry, and given that there's good evidence that they are captured by industry, I don't like our chances.
And you know well that I'm a pharmacist, and I'm definitely not one that flogs the, come in for a supplement and things that you don't need. So I think we're a mixed bag, and unfortunately there's industry pressure on pharmacies to make ends meet. And unfortunately, it's the out of the dispensary, or rather the shop stock, that makes the money. So it's a very bad position to be in. And if more money's being pumped into that's not going to end well, I think.
No, and clearly we would much prefer that pharmacists earn extra money by doing useful things like drug utilisation reviews, working in general practice, to monitor elderly patients who often do need deprescribing. So the irony of it is there's lots of things pharmacists can do that would help quality use of medicines, but they're locked, as you say. The commercial variety are often locked into a remuneration structure that has diminished their income from the back of the shop and the prescription stuff, and is pushing them into craziness in the front of the shop. But hopefully, as I say, there are changes at work there.
So, Ken, perhaps we'll have to do another interview sort of after the 1st of July when this new TGA system comes into play, and we can update the Skeptic Zone listeners on where they can go and lodge their complaints.
And I think, again, it's interesting. I mean, certainly the Australian system has got its problems, but one thing's for sure, we don't have the amount of adulteration craziness that the American supplement system has. Because the TGA does at least insist that the ingredients in our complementary medicines or supplements are relatively safe, are manufactured under good manufacturing practice, and so we don't have a great rate of contamination, adulteration, etc., but we do have a great rate of crazy promotion.
So there you have it. The Act has passed. And there are three main concerns that have been raised. First, the abolishment of the pre-approvals process, although there was a bit of a win in that it'll remain for the next 2 years while the new complaint system is tested. The permitted indications list, which includes some terminology that's not necessarily recognised by medical science, and a rather ambitious compliance and complaints process. I guess we'll have to wait until July to see what happens. That's it from me for now. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Now, it would be remiss if I didn't mention the current story that all skeptics would be reading about at the moment, the alleged sexual harassment allegations, well, the allegations aren't alleged, I guess, against Lawrence Krauss. Now, I've met Lawrence Krauss a total of one time about 6 years ago where I said hello and he said hello. Apart from that, he has never appeared on the Skeptic Zone and I didn't have any plans for him to do so. The length of the allegations against him are disconcerting, to say the least. I'm sure we'll all see how this story plays out in the following weeks. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.